Yep. All right. Well, thanks for coming in today. I'm Kayla, and is Meredith going to be okay today?
Yeah,
Would you have to go
absolutely.
Okay, perfect. The goal of this meeting is going to be to help you become more aware of personal culture values, and we're going to begin to appreciate other cultures as well.
That sounds great.
Throughout this meeting, if you have any questions, let me know, or if you feel uncomfortable, we can stop, and you don't have to answer every question if you don't want to. And before we begin, do you have any questions right now?
I don't think so.
Perfect. All right. So we're going to start off, and I just want to know maybe if there's some aspect of your culture that you have as your childhood, as you grew up, if you'd like to talk about that, any specific holiday customs, or just an experience that you're sharply aware of in your culture.
Sure, absolutely. I think the biggest pieces of my culture, growing up at least, had to do with religion. So my family is traditionally Scots-Irish, but we don't identify with that many practices. Like, I know what color our family crest is or something, but none of us are going to Scotland. But we're heavily Protestant. And with that came a lot of different religious practices. So just the norm that you went to church every Sunday, which I think is a Southern cultural norm as well in the southeastern United States. So we did that, and that was a big deal. When I turned 12, I went through confirmation, and I stood up in front of the church and professed my beliefs. Communion was another big piece in sort of learning what that meant in our faith, and along with that, doing like Lent and going to Easter services and participating in different Christmas traditions that might be considered like traditionally Southern Christian. So that was a big piece of it. And then the other big piece, which it's almost like a subculture, I guess. It's not related necessarily to any particular ethnicity or nationality, but again was a very common cultural practice where I was from, which is participating in agriculture in some way. So doing sheep and cattle shows, that sort of thing.
Awesome. So it sounds like a lot of your family practices and your culture revolved around your religion and agriculture.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So now we're going to look at how your culture may possibly affect how you work with certain people in other cultures.
That sounds good.
So we're going to go back to the portion I had you fill out before we started about the hot buttons.
Mm-hmm.
And in the first section for race and ethnicity, you made a note next to Hispanic.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to go into more detail about that?
Sure. So I currently am in school to become a social worker. And so this is a really awesome way for me to reflect and to think about where my culture is and how it affects how I work with different clients. And so I highlighted that one because I work in schools in Knox County, and there are specific schools that have high Hispanic and Latinx populations. And I think that sometimes they're done a disservice in that people like me who know almost nothing are who works with them first. And then there's like pressure put on children to translate for their parents and that sort of thing. And so it was just making a special note to improve on my cultural competence when working with these populations that I see fairly regularly, and remaining culturally sensitive, if not competent, because it's hard to know everything, and just thinking about the best ways to serve the children and their families.
Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and move on to sex. For female and male, you don't have any notes written down, so those you feel comfortable working with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a large amount of experience with both. I guess one thing that sometimes will happen is sometimes I'll get a complex in my mind when I'm meeting with my college student population that I work with, that anytime like a male student pushes back at something that I say, I like automatically assume it's because I'm a woman, and that's something I have to catch myself on, and make sure that I still treat that student with patience and answer their questions.
Right.
But overall, no, I don't see any problems.
Okay. In sexual orientation, you kind of wrote an over-encompassing check mark around everything. Is that meaning that you feel comfortable working with them, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, it's not something that I am an expert on, like the human sexuality experience, but I did for my job at the university, I was able to take part in a safe zone training, which made me feel a lot more confident in making sure that the language that I used was not only not offensive, but actually inclusive, and helping me to better understand the different aspects of the LGBTQ plus community and how that looks different for every person. Talked about sexuality on a spectrum, all of that stuff. That was the level 1 piece of it. There's extra levels of the training, and I hope to take more, just so that I can, again, better serve clients. Within that, I think probably in my younger years, there was probably some religious unpacking with that, where it was not uncommon to hear the, like, love the sinner, hate the sin thing, and removing myself from that mentality, and sort of saying, no, that's crap, and moving past that and making sure that I treat people equally and see their perspectives.
Right. So throughout training, you feel like you feel more comfortable working with these individuals?
I feel better equipped, like I can make sure that I'm doing what's best.
Awesome. For religion, you have notes next to Buddhist and Hindu. Would you like to just go into more detail about that?
Sure. So again, this was a big thing in that it's just a cultural blind spot for me. I don't know that much about it, and I haven't done loads of research on my own end to learn more about it. So I took like a world religions course, but it mainly focused on religions that I'm already at least have some experience with the traditions, so Judaism, Christianity, Catholicism, Islam, the sort of the big 3. And so I feel comfortable not embarrassing myself when talking to people and maybe understanding cultural norms for there if I was meeting with clients of one of those religions who practiced or held it really closely so they could better understand family dynamics and that sort of thing. But for Hinduism and Buddhism, I have basically zero knowledge, and so that would be something where if I knew I was meeting with a client who was a part of that religion or practiced that, I would need to do some research on my end so that I didn't put the burden on the client to tell me about their perspectives in that.
So for age, you have a mark next to the 61 to 100 plus years. What is that regarding?
Absolutely. So when going through my undergraduate degree for social work, we did a lot of talking about what our interest populations were, populations we thought that we might have trouble working with, that sort of thing. And what always came up for me was I really enjoy working with children and youth. I feel pretty comfortable doing that. It's where most of my experience is. With adolescents and young adults, that's something that I'm sort of growing into, and that's also the category that I'm a part of right now, so it feels easy to relate and to empathize. For the oldest population, for a long time I was against it because most jobs that you hear about are related to hospice, and I had several grandparents that were in hospice care, and it was a really unpleasant experience, and so it just brings up stuff for me that I would prefer to avoid. And I think also sometimes I get in the okay boomer headspace, and that's not fair to everyone. I think that I'm getting better with that as my own parents kind of join this aging population and trying to have some empathy and understanding for their experiences. But a lot of times I have a lot of patience for children who don't see my perspective, but not as much for adults who I think should know better. And so that takes me remembering that my perspective isn't necessarily right just because I like it.
Okay. Right, moving on to socioeconomic. You do have wealthy marked. Would you like to go into more detail about that one?
Sure. So I think that this is, again, a particular kind of righteous headspace that I get into with the idea that because I often work with or study and have experiences with living in poverty or being a part of the working poor, it's easy for me to write off the wealthy as not having any problems, or how bad can your problems be when you don't have to worry about making a living wage and that sort of thing. And remembering that there are still problems that are like universally human, and addressing those and not telling people to buck up, they're rich so everything's fine. So I think that is a tricky perspective to get sometimes, and it's one that I'm working on. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And then we're going to move on to the last one we have is the psychological status. And again, you only have one marked on this one, and that's the actively psychotic.
So again, my education is in social work, and so we do a lot with case referrals and that sort of thing at the undergraduate level. We don't start really talking about how to handle psychiatric emergencies or how to necessarily treat clients that have those types of presenting problems unless you're on a clinical track in a graduate or PhD level. And I just do not have that experience. And so I think that the most I would be able to do is to refer until they're able to be stabilized and I can meet them for case referrals. But I do also acknowledge that there are a lot of stigmas around danger and that sort of thing with this particular client population. And so challenging myself to remember that these clients still need and deserve care, and just because I feel uncomfortable doesn't mean that I can't push myself to learn more, that sort of thing.
Okay. So it seems like overall, the majority of the ones you have marked are due to you maybe not having the experience working with these specific groups, or you just don't have the knowledge of their specific culture or religion for some of them. Does that seem about right? Is that how you feel, or do you feel differently about that?
No, I think that sums it up really nicely. I'm kind of a know-it-all, and so if I feel like I don't have the information, I don't want to do it.
Right. All right. Well, we're going to move into part 3 right now. So it's going to be the reflections about what we talked about and how it makes you feel. So did you learn anything new about yourself as you went through these hot buttons?
I think there were things that I have thought about before, but they're easy to forget.
Right.
The type of thing where I think about it and I reflect on it for a few minutes, and then I kind of bippity-bop on past it and go back to my regular day and back to assuming that I am all-knowing and have got it all together, which is a lovely illusion. So it's good for me to reflect on it and remember the areas that I have for growth.
Did you have any specific reactions as you went through this list regarding about how you feel specifically? Or about how you think you should feel about these people or these cultures?
That's a really good question. I think that I didn't have any like
immediate
reactions, but it was, I didn't really know what I was going to say as I was saying it. So it was interesting to hear what I said as it happened and kind of assess like, oh, that is my perspective. Isn't that interesting? What are we going to do with that? So, yeah.
Right. Perfect. Well, that leads right into this last question about how, if you're going to make any changes you feel, or if you'd like to work on specific things. Was there anything that stood out throughout this, these questions, these hot buttons per se?
Yeah, I think that a big area for me that I've slowly been becoming more aware of, and this helped me sort of talk through it, is remembering that just because someone has certain privileges in society doesn't mean that they don't also have struggles, and so remembering that all people are of equal value and worth, and making sure that I act as such, and I don't put my social justice warrior hat on and discriminate against other people that I think are powerful.
Right. All right. Well, that's all I have. Do you have any other questions or comments before?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in, and have a good day.
Thank you.